The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March of 1885, delivered by a dust-covered rider who looked like he had traveled through hell itself to reach the cattle drive where Benjamin Masters was working. Benjamin took the envelope with calloused hands, squinting at the fancy script that spelled out his name, and felt his gut twist with an unfamiliar sensation that might have been hope or might have been dread. Inside, a lawyer from Columbus, New Mexico, informed him that his uncle, a man he had met exactly twice in his 26 years, had passed away and left him a ranch, which sounded like a dream until he read the next line about debts, failing cattle, and a property barely hanging on by a thread. 3 weeks later, Benjamin rode into Columbus with nothing but his horse, his rifle, a bedroll, and a leather satchel containing every dollar he had managed to save from 5 years of hard work on various cattle drives across Texas and New Mexico territory. The town sat near the Mexican border, a collection of adobe buildings and weathered wood structures that seemed to shimmer in the heat rising from the desert floor. It was not much to look at, but it had a general store, a saloon, a church, and a bank, which meant it had everything a man needed to either make something of himself or lose everything trying. The ranch lay 4 miles outside of town, accessible by a rutted road that wound through mesquite and creosote bushes. As Benjamin approached, his first glimpse of his inheritance made his heart sink lower than it had been since he was 15, and watched his parents' farm get auctioned off to pay their debts. The fence posts leaned at drunken angles, the barn door hung crooked on its hinges, and the main house looked like a strong wind might knock it sideways. The corral was empty except for 2 scraggly horses that looked half-starved, and he could see gaps in the roof where shingles had blown away. But what caught his attention more than any of the disrepair was the young woman sitting on the porch steps with a shotgun across her knees. She was maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair pulled back in a braid that fell past her shoulders, and she wore a faded blue dress that had been mended so many times it was hard to tell what the original fabric had looked like. Her face was pretty in a way that made Benjamin's breath catch, even though her expression was hard as the desert rocks surrounding them. She did not move as he approached, just watched him with eyes that were the color of whiskey in lamplight, brown and gold and burning with something that looked like defiance mixed with desperation. "You must be the nephew," she said, when he was close enough to hear. Her voice carried a roughness that suggested she had spent too many days crying and was determined not to do it anymore. "The lawyer said you would be coming." Benjamin dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible and away from his gun. "Name is Benjamin Masters." "I am guessing you are the reason the lawyer mentioned complications in his letter." "My name is Natalie Foster, and I have lived on this land for 3 years. Your uncle gave me and my husband permission to build a cabin on the back 40 acres, and we worked this ranch alongside him until my husband died 6 months ago. I have nowhere else to go, and I am not leaving." She lifted the shotgun just enough to make her point clear without exactly pointing it at him. Benjamin studied her for a long moment, taking in the shadows under her eyes, and the way her hands gripped the gun like it was the only thing keeping her upright. He had seen that look before, on his own face in the mirror after his parents died, the expression of someone who had lost everything and was clinging to the last piece of solid ground they could find. "The lawyer did not mention a cabin or anyone working the ranch with my uncle," Benjamin said carefully. "He just said the property was failing and there were debts." "There are plenty of debts," Natalie said bitterly. "Your uncle was a good man, but he was not a good businessman. He loaned money to half the people in Columbus and never collected. He paid top dollar for cattle that were not worth half that, and he trusted the wrong people. After my husband died, I tried to keep things going, but I am one person and this ranch needs at least 6 hands to run properly." Benjamin looked around at the property again, calculating in his head how much it would cost to fix the fences, repair the buildings, and buy enough cattle to make the place profitable. The number he came up with was more than he had, probably more than he could earn in 2 years of solid work. "Why would you want to stay here if it is failing so badly?" Something flickered in Natalie's eyes, a pain so raw that Benjamin almost looked away. "Because my husband is buried on that back 40, under the cottonwood tree we planted together when we first came here. Because this was supposed to be our future, the place where we would raise our children and grow old together. Because if I leave, then everything we dreamed about was for nothing, and I cannot accept that." The sun beat down on them both, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cried out as it circled overhead. Benjamin felt the weight of his own losses pressing on him, remembered the feeling of walking away from his childhood home knowing he would never return, and he made a decision that was probably foolish but felt necessary in a way he could not quite explain. "I am not going to run you off," he said quietly, "but I need to understand what I am dealing with here. Can you show me around the property and explain exactly what state everything is in?" Natalie's grip on the shotgun loosened slightly, and Benjamin saw the first hint of relief cross her face before she schooled her expression back into hardness. "Why would you let me stay? You do not even know me." "Because I know what it is like to lose everything," Benjamin said simply. "And because, if you have been trying to keep this place going for 6 months on your own, then you know more about it than I do. I am a fair hand with cattle, and I can fix most things that are broken, but I do not know this land or what my uncle was dealing with. Seems like I could use your help as much as you need a place to stay." She stood up slowly, setting the shotgun aside with visible reluctance, and Benjamin got his first full look at her. She was slender in a way that suggested she had not been eating enough, and there was a weariness in the way she moved that spoke of long days and longer nights. But there was also a strength in her bearing, a determination that showed in the set of her shoulders and the way she met his eyes directly. "The cattle are the biggest problem," Natalie said as she led him toward the barn. "Your uncle had nearly 200 head when I first came here. Now there are maybe 40 left, and half of those are too old or sick to be worth much. He had to sell most of them to pay debts, and some just wandered off when the fences got too bad to hold them." The barn was in better shape than Benjamin had expected from the outside, though it was clear that supplies were running low. There were a few bags of feed in the corner, some tack that needed mending, and tools that were well used but properly cared for. Natalie showed him where the roof leaked, where the stalls needed new boards, and where mice had gotten into the grain stores. "The house is not much better," she continued as they walked back outside. "The stove works, but the chimney needs cleaning. There are holes in 2 of the bedroom walls where the plaster has crumbled, and the pump for the well sticks something terrible. I have been doing what I can, but I am not a carpenter." Benjamin made mental notes of everything she told him, his mind already working through what he could fix himself and what would require hired help or materials he would have to buy in town. "What about the cabin where you have been living?" "It is small but sound," Natalie said, and for the first time, there was a softness in her voice. "My husband was a good builder. It is just 1 room, but the roof does not leak and the walls are thick enough to keep out the cold in winter and the heat in summer. There is a small garden plot where I grow vegetables, and a chicken coop, though I only have 3 hens left now." They walked the property for the next 2 hours, and Benjamin got a clearer picture of both the challenges and the potential. The land itself was good, with access to a creek that ran year-round and enough grazing to support a decent-sized herd. The problems were all man-made. the result of poor decisions and bad luck, and not enough money or manpower to keep things running properly. When they finally stopped in the shade of the cottonwood tree where Natalie's husband was buried, Benjamin could see the care she had taken with the grave. There was a wooden cross with his name carved carefully into it, and someone had planted wildflowers around the base that were struggling but still alive in the dry soil. His name was Thomas, Natalie said quietly. Thomas Foster. He was 25 when he died, thrown from a horse that spooked at a rattlesnake. He broke his neck and was gone before I could even get to him. Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, and she turned away, staring out at the desert landscape that stretched to the horizon. Benjamin did not know what to say, so he just stood there in respectful silence, giving her the space to collect herself. After a moment, she took a deep breath and turned back to face him, her eyes dry but haunted. "I know this place does not look like much," Natalie said. "But it could be something if someone was willing to work at it. Your uncle was old and tired, and after Thomas died, he just seemed to give up. But the bones are good, Mr. Masters. With the right effort, this could be a real ranch again." "Call me Benjamin," he said. "And I am not afraid of hard work, but I need to be honest with you about what I have got. I have $300 saved, which is not enough to do everything that needs doing. I can fix the fences and the buildings myself given time and materials, but buying cattle and keeping us fed while I do that work is going to stretch things tight." Natalie nodded slowly, and Benjamin could see her mind working behind her eyes. "I have a little money saved from selling eggs and vegetables in town. It is not much, maybe $40, but you can have it to buy materials. And I can keep us fed from the garden and the chickens and hunting if you can spare me ammunition for the rifle. I am a decent shot." "I am not taking your money," Benjamin said firmly. "If we are going to make this work, we do it as partners. You keep what is yours and we will figure out the rest together." Something shifted in Natalie's expression, a wariness giving way to cautious hope. "You really mean that?" "We would be partners. You know this land and you have been keeping it going when you could have just walked away," Benjamin said. "That counts for something in my book. I do not have family left, and it sounds like you do not either. Maybe we can build something here together, not as strangers but as people working toward the same goal." For the first time since he had arrived, Natalie smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "I think Thomas would have liked you," she said softly. "He always believed in giving people a fair chance." They walked back to the main house together, and Benjamin felt some of the loneliness that had been his constant companion for years ease just slightly. It was not gone, might never be fully gone, but having someone to talk to, someone to work alongside, made the impossible task ahead feel just a little more manageable. Over the next few days, Benjamin settled into a routine that started before dawn and did not end until well after dark. He began with the most urgent repairs, fixing the fence posts closest to the house, and patching the roof over the bedroom he had claimed as his own. Natalie worked beside him when she could, holding boards steady while he hammered or mixing plaster for the walls, and he found himself grateful for her presence in ways that had nothing to do with the actual help she provided. She was easy to talk to once the initial wariness wore off, with a quick wit and a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. She told him about growing up in Kansas, about how she and Thomas had met at a church social and fallen in love, despite her father's objections that Thomas had no prospects. They had married anyway and headed west looking for opportunity, ending up in Columbus by chance when their wagon broke an axle, and they did not have enough money to fix it and keep traveling. "Your uncle found us camped by the creek, trying to figure out what to do next," Natalie said one evening as they sat on the porch, eating a simple dinner of beans and cornbread. He offered Thomas a job on the spot, said he needed help with the cattle and could use a man who was not afraid of hard work. We thought we would stay for a few months, save up some money and move on. But your uncle was kind to us, and this place grew on us, and eventually it just felt like home. Benjamin listened and shared his own story in turn, about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to fever when he was 15, and having to watch everything they had built get sold off. He told her about the years he had spent drifting from job to job, working cattle drives and ranches across half the West, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots because he was afraid of losing everything again. "But you came here," Natalie said, her eyes reflecting the lamplight. "You could have sold this place sight unseen and kept drifting, but you came." "I am tired of drifting," Benjamin admitted. "I want something that is mine, something I can build and know it will still be there tomorrow. Even if this place is falling apart and buried in debt, it is more than I have had in a long time." "Then we will build it together," Natalie said firmly. "We will make it work." The days turned into weeks, and slowly the ranch began to show signs of improvement. Benjamin fixed the fences section by section, replaced the barn door, and got the pump working properly. Natalie tended the garden and the chickens, sold eggs in town when she had extras, and used the money to buy nails and boards and other supplies they needed. They worked from sunup to sundown, falling into bed exhausted each night, but there was a satisfaction in seeing the progress they were making. Benjamin found himself watching Natalie more than he should, noticing the way she pushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the way her face lit up when something grew in the garden, the way she sometimes stood by her husband's grave in the evening and spoke softly to the wooden cross. He told himself it was wrong to feel drawn to a widow who was still clearly grieving, that he should focus on the ranch and nothing else. But his heart did not seem to care about what his head thought was proper. One morning in early May, Benjamin rode into town to meet with the banker and get a clearer picture of exactly how much his uncle owed and to whom. The news was not good. There were outstanding loans totaling nearly $800, owed to the bank and to various merchants in town who had extended credit for supplies. The banker, a severe man named Mr. Harrison with thin lips and calculating eyes, made it clear that he expected payment soon or he would be forced to foreclose. "Your uncle was a generous man, but generosity does not pay debts," Mr. Harrison said coldly. "I can give you until the end of summer to come up with at least half of what is owed. If you cannot manage that, I will have to take possession of the property." Benjamin left the bank feeling like he had been punched in the stomach. $400 by the end of August, in addition to everything else they needed to keep the ranch running. It seemed impossible, but he had learned years ago that impossible just meant you had to work harder and be smarter than everyone else. He bought supplies with the little cash he had left, loading fence wire, nails, flour, sugar, and coffee onto his horse, and was heading back out of town when he heard a commotion coming from the alley beside the general store. He could hear a woman's voice, frightened and pleading, and male laughter that made his blood run cold. Benjamin tied his horse and walked quickly toward the alley, his hand automatically going to the gun at his hip. He found two men, ranch hands by the look of them, cornering a Mexican woman who was trying to shield a basket of laundry from their grabbing hands. "Leave her alone," Benjamin said, his voice cutting through their laughter. The two men turned, and Benjamin recognized them as hands from the Martinez Ranch, the largest spread in the area. One was tall and mean-looking with a scar across his cheek, the other shorter but thick through the shoulders. "This is not your business, stranger," the scarred one said. We are just having a little fun." "The lady does not look like she is having fun," Benjamin said evenly. "So I am making it my business. Let her go." The shorter man took a step forward, his hand hovering near his gun. "You want to make something of this?" Benjamin met his eyes steadily, keeping his own hand relaxed but ready. "I do not want trouble, but I will not stand by and watch you harass a woman who has done nothing to you. Walk away now and we can all forget this happened." For a long moment, nobody moved and Benjamin could feel the tension crackling in the air like heat lightning. Then the scarred man spat in the dirt and jerked his head toward the street. "Come on, it is not worth it. But you should watch yourself, friend. You just made some enemies." They stalked away, and Benjamin turned to the woman, who was clutching her basket and looking at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Are you all right, madam?" "See, yes, thank you," she said in heavily accented English. "They are bad men, those two. They work for Senator Martinez, and they think they can do whatever they want because he is important." "What is your name?" Benjamin asked gently. "Rosa Jimenez. I take in washing to support my family." She hesitated, then added, "You should be careful, Senator. Senator Martinez does not like people who cross his men. He has much power in this town." Benjamin helped her gather the laundry that had fallen from her basket and walked her back to the main street before returning to his horse. The encounter left him unsettled, not because he was worried about the two ranch hands, but because it reminded him of how easily power could be abused, how people with money could make life difficult for those without it. When he got back to the ranch, he found Natalie in the garden, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants. She looked up as he approached, and whatever expression was on his face made her stand quickly, wiping her hands on her apron. "What happened?" she asked. Benjamin told her about the meeting with the banker and the encounter in the alley, and he watched her face grow progressively more troubled. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring at the horizon. $400 by August, she said finally. "We would need to sell at least 30 cattle at good prices to make that, and we only have about 40 head total. We cannot sell that many without leaving us with nothing to build on." "I know," Benjamin said heavily. "I have been trying to figure out an alternative all the way back from town. We could try to take on some work for other ranches, but that would mean less time to fix up this place. Or we could try to buy some young cattle cheap and fatten them up to sell, but that is a gamble and we do not have money for gamblers." Natalie sat down on the porch steps, and Benjamin sat beside her, both of them looking out at the land that was slowly becoming something they could be proud of. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but heavy with the weight of their shared problem. "There might be another option," Natalie said slowly. "It is not ideal, but it could work. The army fort over at Deeming sometimes buys beef for their soldiers. If we could get our cattle there and make a sale, they pay fair prices, better than what we would get from a regular buyer. It is about 70 miles from here, which would mean a cattle drive, but if we could pull it off." Benjamin considered it. A cattle drive with 40 head was not the massive undertaking that the big trail drives were, but it was still a risk with just the two of them. They would need to move the cattle through rough country, keep them together, protect them from rustlers and predators, and hope that the army was buying when they arrived. But it might be their only real chance. "How do you know about the fort buying cattle?" he asked. "Thomas and I drove some cattle there for your uncle 2 years ago," Natalie said. "It was before your uncle started having money troubles. We took 50 head and got a good price, enough to buy supplies and put some money in the bank. I know the route, and I know the officer who handles the purchasing. If we could get there with healthy cattle, I think we could make the sale." Benjamin looked at her, this woman who had been a stranger just weeks ago and who now felt like the only ally he had in the world. That would mean leaving the ranch unattended for at least a week, maybe more. And it would be hard travel, just the two of us with 40 head. I know, Natalie said quietly, but I do not see another choice. If we do nothing, we lose everything anyway. At least this gives us a fighting chance. He knew she was right, even as every instinct told him how risky it was. But Benjamin had learned long ago that sometimes you had to risk everything to have any chance of winning. All right, he said, we will do it, but we need to prepare carefully. We will spend the next few weeks getting the cattle as healthy as possible and gathering supplies for the drive. And we will need to tell someone in town where we are going in case something happens. Natalie nodded, and Benjamin saw the determination in her eyes, the same fire that had made her refuse to leave this land even when she had nothing. We can do this, she said. We have to. They spent the next 3 weeks in a frenzy of preparation. Benjamin rode the property each day, gathering the scattered cattle and bringing them closer to the ranch. Many of them were thin and wild from lack of attention, and he spent hours working them in the corral, getting them used to being handled again. Natalie used her remaining money to buy supplies for the trip, beans and salt pork and coffee, and she mended the saddlebags and bedrolls until they were road ready. During those weeks, Benjamin and Natalie grew closer in ways that had nothing to do with the work they shared. They talked late into the evening about their hopes and fears, about the lives they had lost and the future they were trying to build. Benjamin found himself drawn to her strength and her vulnerability in equal measure. The way she could work all day without complaining, but sometimes stood by Thomas's grave with tears streaming down her face. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the desert, Natalie turned to him with a serious expression. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. All right, Benjamin said, feeling his heart start to beat faster. Why are you really doing this? You could walk away tomorrow, let the bank take this place and find work somewhere else. You have the skills and the experience. You do not owe me anything, and you barely knew your uncle. So why are you fighting so hard for a failing ranch and a woman you just met? Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, trying to find the right words for feelings he was not sure he fully understood himself. When I rode up here that first day and saw you on those steps with your shotgun, I saw myself, he finally said. Not the details, but the feeling underneath. You were someone who had lost everything, but was still fighting, still refusing to give up even when it would have been easier to quit. I have spent 10 years drifting because I was afraid to care about anything enough that losing it would hurt. But watching you, seeing how hard you fight for this place even though it breaks your heart every day, made me realize that drifting is not living. I am doing this because I want to be the kind of man who stands and fights, not the kind who runs. And because somewhere along the way your fight became my fight. Natalie's eyes were bright with unshed tears, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I am scared, Benjamin. I am scared that we are going to fail, that I am going to lose this place just like I lost Thomas, and I do not know if I can survive that. Without thinking, Benjamin reached out and took her hand, feeling the roughness of her calloused palm against his. We are not going to fail, he said firmly. We are going to take these cattle to Fort Deeming. We are going to make that sale, and we are going to save this ranch. And even if everything goes wrong, even if we lose it all, we will face it together. You are not alone anymore, Natalie. She squeezed his hand tightly, and they sat there in the gathering darkness, holding on to each other like lifelines in a storm. Benjamin knew he was falling for her, knew it was probably too soon and possibly unwelcome, but he could not help the way his heart lifted every time she smiled, or the way he looked for her first thing every morning. They left for Fort Deeming on a clear morning in early June, driving 40 head of cattle that represented their entire hope for saving the ranch. The journey started well enough, with the cattle moving steadily and the weather holding clear. Benjamin rode point, guiding the herd, while Natalie rode drag, keeping the stragglers moving and watching for any that tried to break away. The first day was long but uneventful, and they made good progress, covering nearly 15 miles before stopping for the night near a small creek. They took turns watching the herd while the others slept, and Benjamin found himself lying awake during his rest period, listening to Natalie humming softly as she circled the cattle on horseback. The second day brought their first real trouble when they reached a stretch of country where the grass was sparse and the cattle started to get restless. One young bull kept trying to break away, and Benjamin had to rope him 3 times before he finally settled. By the time they stopped for the night, both of them were exhausted and short-tempered. "That bull is going to be trouble the whole way," Natalie said as she unsaddled her horse. "We should have left him behind." "We need every head we can sell," Benjamin replied, more sharply than he intended. "We will just have to keep a closer eye on him." Natalie shot him a look but did not argue, and they ate their dinner in strained silence. Benjamin knew he should apologize, but pride kept the words stuck in his throat. It was not until he was on watch that night, sitting by the fire and listening to the cattle settling down, that Natalie came and sat beside him. "I am sorry I snapped at you," she said quietly. "I am just tired and worried about making it to the fort in time." "I am sorry too," Benjamin said immediately. "You were right about the bull. We should have thought harder about which cattle to bring." "We are doing the best we can with what we have," Natalie said, and she leaned her head against his shoulder in a gesture that felt both natural and momentous. "That is all anyone can do." Benjamin carefully put his arm around her, half expecting her to pull away, but she stayed where she was, and they sat like that for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead and the fire burn down to embers. The third day brought more serious trouble when they crossed paths with a group of men driving a small herd in the opposite direction. The men were rough-looking and heavily armed, and their leader, a grizzled man with a missing ear, rode up to Benjamin with an expression that was somewhere between curious and threatening. "That is a nice little herd you got there," the man said. "Where you headed?" "Fort Deeming," Benjamin said evenly, his hand resting casually near his gun. "We have got a buyer waiting." "Fort Deeming, that is a long way off yet. Lots of things can happen between here and there. Cattle can get lost, stolen, scattered by storms." "Dangerous country for just 2 people, especially with a woman along." "We are managing fine," Benjamin said, feeling his muscles tense, "and we are not looking for any trouble." The man grinned, showing yellow teeth. "No trouble at all, friend, just making conversation. But if you find yourself needing any help along the way, you just let us know. We are always happy to assist fellow travelers for a fair price." He rode away laughing, and Benjamin watched until the group was out of sight before relaxing slightly. Natalie rode up beside him, her face pale but her jaw set. "Those were rustlers," she said flatly. "I recognize the leader. His name is Jack Sullivan, and he has a reputation for stealing cattle and selling them across the border. Thomas and I saw him in town once, and your uncle warned us to stay away from him." "Do you think they will come after our herd?" Benjamin asked, already knowing the answer. "I think they are going to wait until we are tired and off guard, and then they are going to try to take everything," Natalie said. "We need to be ready." They pushed the cattle harder that day, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Sullivan's group. But Benjamin knew they could not keep up that pace indefinitely, and the cattle were already showing signs of stress. That night, They made camp in a small canyon that offered some protection, and they took turns on watch, sleeping in shifts with their guns close at hand. The attack came just before dawn, when the sky was starting to lighten, but it was still too dark to see clearly. Benjamin heard the thunder of hooves and the crack of gunfire, and he was on his feet with his rifle in hand before his mind fully caught up with what was happening. He saw shapes moving in the darkness, riders circling their herd and trying to scatter the cattle. "Natalie," he shouted, running toward where he had last seen her. "I am here," she called back, and he saw her crouched behind a boulder with the shotgun raised. She fired once, and one of the riders yelped and veered away. Benjamin fired his rifle at another rider, not trying to kill but to drive them back. And for several chaotic minutes, the canyon was full of gunfire and shouting and the panicked bellowing of cattle. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it was over. The riders retreated and Benjamin could hear them cursing as they rode away. He ran to Natalie and found her shaking but unhurt. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she said, though her voice trembled. "Did they get any of the cattle?" They spent the next hour rounding up the scattered herd and counting heads. To their relief, they had only lost 3, fewer than Benjamin had feared. But the attack had left them both shaken and exhausted, and they knew Sullivan might try again. "We need to keep moving," Benjamin said as the sun rose fully. "If we can make it to Fort Deeming, we will be safe. The army does not tolerate rustlers operating that close to their post." They drove the cattle hard for the next 2 days, barely stopping to rest, and Benjamin watched Natalie grow progressively more exhausted. She never complained, but he could see the toll it was taking, the way she swayed in the saddle and had to force herself to stay alert. On the 6th day, they finally saw Fort Deeming in the distance, and Benjamin felt a wave of relief so strong it made him dizzy. They had made it. Against all odds, with rustlers and exhaustion and a troublesome bull, they had gotten the herd to the fort. The post commander was a captain named Richards, a competent-looking man in his 30s who examined their cattle with a critical eye. Natalie spoke with him, reminding him of the previous sale 2 years ago, and Benjamin watched her work, impressed by how she handled the negotiation. In the end, they got $12 a head for 35 cattle, keeping 5 back to rebuild their herd. It was not as much as Benjamin had hoped for, but it was enough. $420, more than enough to pay the banker and buy some supplies to keep them going. That night, after the cattle were sold and the money safely tucked away, Benjamin and Natalie got a room at the small hotel in town. It was the first time in a week that they had slept in a real bed, and the first time they had been truly alone together without the worry of the cattle or rustlers. Natalie stood at the window looking out at the darkening street, and Benjamin came up behind her, close enough that he could smell the soap she had used to wash away a week's worth of trail dust. "We did it," he said softly. "You were right. It was crazy and dangerous, but it worked." She turned to face him, and in the lamplight, she looked younger and more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. "I could not have done it without you. If you had not come, if you had just sold the ranch or run me off, I would have lost everything. If you had not been there, I would have had no reason to fight," Benjamin said. "You gave me something to care about again, Natalie. You made me want to be better than I was." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, and Benjamin felt his heart hammering in his chest. "I think I am falling in love with you," she whispered. "I did not think I could feel this way again after Thomas, but somehow you made it possible." "I love you," Benjamin said, the words coming easier than he expected. "I think I have loved you since that first day when you were sitting on those steps with your shotgun, refusing to give up even when you had every reason to." She kissed him then, and it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Benjamin wrapped his arms around her and held her close, feeling like he had finally found the home he had been searching for all these years. They stayed at the fort for 2 days, resting and buying supplies before beginning the journey back to the ranch. The return trip was easier without the cattle, and they made good time, riding side by side and talking about their plans for the future. "We will pay off the banker first thing," Natalie said as they rode. "Then we will use what is left to buy some young cattle and the materials to finish repairing the ranch. If we are careful, we should have enough to get us through until we can sell more cattle next year. And then we build from there," Benjamin said. "Slowly and carefully, not trying to do too much too fast. We will make the ranch profitable, pay off the rest of the debts, and create something that will last." "Together," Natalie said, and it was not a question but a statement of fact. "Together," Benjamin agreed. When they arrived back at the ranch, Benjamin was struck by how different it felt. The buildings were still in need of repair, and the fences still had sections that needed fixing, but it looked like a home now instead of a burden. He had only been gone a week, but it felt like he was returning to something precious and hard-won. The first thing they did was ride into town to pay Mr. Harrison at the bank. The banker looked surprised to see them walk in with $400 in cash, and even more surprised when Benjamin counted it out onto his desk. "This covers half the debt as you required," Benjamin said formally. "I will have the rest paid off within a year." Mr. Harrison counted the money twice, his expression sour, as if he was disappointed not to be foreclosing on the property. "Very well, Mr. Masters. I will update the account, but I will be watching to make sure you make good on the rest." "You do that," Benjamin said coolly, and he walked out with Natalie beside him, feeling lighter than he had in months. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a new rhythm on the ranch. Benjamin finished repairing the barn and started on the house, while Natalie expanded the garden and bought more chickens with some of their remaining money. They worked together during the day and spent their evenings on the porch, talking and planning and slowly learning all the small things about each other that people in love want to know. Benjamin learned that Natalie hated coffee but pretended to like it because Thomas had loved it, and that she had a beautiful singing voice that she only used when she thought no one was listening. He learned that she was afraid of snakes, but would kill one without hesitation if it threatened her chickens, and that she cried when she was angry, but her face went still and cold when she was truly furious. Natalie learned that Benjamin had a talent for woodworking and would spend hours carving small things out of scraps when he needed to think. She learned that he had a terrible poker face, but was brilliant at checkers, and that he had never learned to dance because his parents had been too religious to allow it. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes about losing everything, and that the only thing that seemed to help was when she held his hand and reminded him that he was not alone. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Benjamin turned to Natalie and took her hand. "I have been thinking about something," he said carefully, "and I want to know what you think." "All right," Natalie said, looking at him with curiosity. "This ranch is starting to feel like a real home," Benjamin said, "and you and we work well together. We have built something here, not just the physical ranch but something between us. And I was thinking that maybe we should make it official." Natalie's eyes widened slightly. "Benjamin, what are you saying?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a wooden ring that he had carved from a piece of cottonwood, smooth and simple but made with care. "I am saying that I love you, Natalie Foster. I am saying that I want to spend the rest of my life working beside you, building this ranch, and whatever else we decide to build together. I am saying that I want you to be my wife, if you will have me." Tears were streaming down Natalie's face, but she was smiling, a wide, genuine smile that made Benjamin's heart soar. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Benjamin Masters, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He slipped the wooden ring onto her finger, and she kissed him with a passion that made him forget about the ranch and the debts and everything else except the feeling of her in his arms. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard and grinning like fools. "We should go to town tomorrow and talk to the minister," Natalie said. "I do not want a big wedding, just something simple." "Whatever you want," Benjamin said, "as long as I get to call you my wife at the end of it." They were married 3 days later in the small church in Columbus, with the minister's wife and the general store owner as witnesses. Natalie wore a dress she had borrowed from Rosa Jimenez, the woman Benjamin had helped in the alley, and Benjamin wore his best shirt and the only pair of pants he owned that did not have patches. It was not fancy or elaborate, but it was perfect. After the ceremony, they rode back to the ranch as husband and wife, and Benjamin felt a completeness that he had not known was possible. That night, as they lay together in the bedroom that was now truly theirs, Natalie rested her head on his chest and spoke softly. "I want you to know that I love Thomas," she said. "And I will always love him in a way, but what I feel for you is different, deeper maybe because I know how precious it is. You gave me a reason to keep living when I thought I was just going through the motions. You gave me hope again." "You did the same for me," Benjamin said, running his fingers through her long dark hair. "I was so afraid of caring about anything that I had stopped really living. But you showed me that taking the risk is worth it, that building something with someone is better than protecting yourself from loss." They made love that night with a tenderness and passion that spoke of both their love and their gratitude for finding each other. And afterward, as Natalie slept in his arms, Benjamin lay awake and thought about how strange life was, how he had come to this failing ranch expecting nothing but more hardship, and had found instead a home and a wife and a future worth fighting for. The rest of the summer and fall passed in a blur of hard work and small victories. They bought 10 young cattle with the money they had left and worked to fatten them up for sale the following year. Benjamin finished repairing the house and started on rebuilding the corral, while Natalie's garden flourished and began producing more vegetables than they could eat, allowing her to sell the extras in town for additional income. Word got around Columbus about how they had driven cattle to Fort Deeming and made enough to pay off half their debt, and people began to look at them with a new respect. The general store owner extended them credit, and other ranchers stopped by to offer advice and occasionally help with larger projects. In October, Rosa Jimenez's husband came to the ranch with a request. His name was Miguel, and he was a skilled carpenter who had been out of work since the sawmill closed. "I hear you are doing well and might need help," he said in careful English. "I am good worker, and I know you helped my Rosa. If you have work, I would be grateful for the job." Benjamin and Natalie looked at each other, having a silent conversation with their eyes, and then Benjamin nodded. "We cannot pay much right now, but if you are willing to work for a share of what we make when we sell cattle next spring, we could use the help." Miguel's face lit up. "I will work hard, you will see. And Rosa, she can help Mrs. Masters with the garden and the house if you need." It became a partnership that benefited everyone. Miguel proved to be as skilled as he claimed, and with his help, they rebuilt the barn properly and constructed a new storage shed for hay and equipment. Rosa helped Natalie with the preserving and canning, and the two women became close friends, chattering in a mix of English and Spanish while they worked. As winter approached, the ranch was in better shape than it had been in years. The buildings were sound, the fences were repaired, the cattle were healthy, and there was money in the bank and food in the cellar. Benjamin and Natalie sat on their porch on Christmas Eve, wrapped in blankets against the cold, and looked out at the land that was truly theirs now. "We did it," Natalie said softly. "We actually did it. The ranch is going to make it." "We did it," Benjamin agreed, "and we are just getting started." She turned to him with a strange expression, nervous and excited at the same time. "I have something to tell you," she said. "I have been waiting for the right moment, and I think this is it." Benjamin felt his heart start to beat faster. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," Natalie said, her voice trembling slightly. "About 3 months along, I think. We are going to have a baby next summer." For a moment, Benjamin could not speak, could not do anything but stare at her as the news sank in. Then joy washed over him so powerfully that he pulled her into his arms, holding her close and laughing. "A baby," he said. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Natalie asked, pulling back to look at his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Benjamin said. "You have given me everything, Natalie. A home, a purpose, love, and now a family. I did not know I could feel this complete." She kissed him, and they sat there in the cold Christmas night, holding each other and talking about the future, about names for the baby and what kind of parents they wanted to be, and how they would expand the house to make room for their growing family. The winter passed peacefully, and Benjamin spent the cold months preparing for the baby's arrival. He built a cradle from cottonwood, carving it with the same care he had used to make Natalie's wedding ring, and Natalie sewed tiny clothes and blankets with fabric she bought in town. In March, they drove cattle to Fort Deeming again, this time with Miguel's help and a herd of 25 head. Natalie stayed home this time, her pregnancy too advanced for the hard journey, and Benjamin missed her every moment he was gone. But the sale went well, and he returned with enough money to pay off the rest of their debt and buy supplies for the baby. The day he walked into the bank and paid off the final dollar he owed, Benjamin felt like he could fly. Mr. Harrison counted the money with a sour expression and grudgingly handed over the deed to the ranch, now free and clear of all debt. "You managed to surprise me, Mr. Masters," the banker said stiffly. "I did not think you had it in you." "I had help," Benjamin said simply, taking the deed and walking out without looking back. Their son was born on a hot day in late June, after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours and left Benjamin pacing the porch like a caged animal while Rosa attended to Natalie. When he finally heard the baby's cry, strong and lusty, he felt his knees go weak with relief. Rosa came to the door with a huge smile. "You have a son, Senator Benjamin, a big, healthy boy, and Mrs. Natalie, she is tired but well." Benjamin rushed inside to find Natalie propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but glowing with happiness as she held their son. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was screaming his displeasure at being born, his tiny fists waving in the air. "He has your temper," Benjamin said, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and looking down at his son with wonder. "And your stubbornness," Natalie said with a tired laugh. "Look at how he fights." They named him Samuel after Benjamin's father, and he became the center of their world. Benjamin had never imagined himself as a father, had never thought he would live long enough or settle down enough to have a family. But holding Samuel in his arms felt like the most natural thing in the world. The ranch continued to prosper over the next few years. They expanded their herds slowly and carefully, never overextending themselves, and the reputation they had built for quality cattle meant they always found buyers. Miguel and Rosa remained with them, and their own family grew as well, with 2 children born in quick succession. When Samuel was 2, Natalie became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine. She was quieter than her brother, with Benjamin's blue eyes and Natalie's dark hair, and she had her mother's determination and her father's patience. Benjamin built onto the house, adding more rooms as their family grew, and the ranch that had once been failing became one of the most successful small operations in the area. They hired additional hands during busy seasons, always paying fair wages and treating their workers with respect, and people began to speak of the master's ranch as a good place to work. One evening in the spring of 1891, Benjamin and Natalie sat on the porch watching Samuel, now 5, chase Catherine, now 3, around the yard while the sun set. The ranch stretched out before them, the fences straight and strong, the cattle fat and healthy, the buildings sound and well-maintained. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Natalie asked, leaning against Benjamin's shoulder. "If you had decided to sell the ranch when you inherited it, or if I had left when you arrived." "I think about it sometimes," Benjamin admitted. "But then I look at what we have built together and I cannot imagine any other path. This was meant to be, you and me and this place." "I still visit Thomas's grave sometimes," Natalie said softly. "I tell him about Samuel and Catherine, about the ranch and how well we are doing. I think he would be happy for us." "I think he would," Benjamin agreed. "And I hope he knows that I will take care of you and honor what you had with him by loving you the way you deserve to be loved." Natalie turned and kissed him, slow and sweet. "You do," she whispered. "Every single day you do." As the years continued to pass, the ranch became a cornerstone of the community. They weathered droughts and hard winters, good years and lean years, but they faced everything together. Miguel became Benjamin's partner in running the ranch, and his children grew up alongside Samuel and Catherine, all of them learning to work the land and care for the cattle. When Samuel was 10 and Catherine was 8, Natalie became pregnant one more time, surprising them both since they had thought their family was complete. She gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Jacob and Grace, and the house rang with laughter and chaos and the beautiful noise of a large, happy family. Benjamin taught his sons and daughters everything he knew about ranching, about being fair and working hard and never giving up even when things looked impossible. He taught them to treat everyone with respect regardless of their background, to keep their word, and to fight for what mattered. Natalie taught them to read and write, to cook and garden, to be kind but strong, and to never let anyone tell them what they could not do. She told them stories about their grandfather Thomas, making sure they knew that their family history included loss and struggle as well as triumph, and that it was okay to grieve while still moving forward. On a warm evening in June of 1900, Benjamin and Natalie celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, Miguel and Rosa and their family, and friends from all over the county. They stood together on the porch of the ranch house that had once been a broken-down wreck and was now a proper home, and Benjamin raised his glass in a toast. 15 years ago, I inherited a failing ranch and met a heartbroken girl who refused to leave," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "I thought I was coming here to claim property, but what I found was so much more. I found a partner, a wife, a family, and a home. I found a reason to fight and a reason to hope. Everything good in my life started the day I met Natalie Foster on those porch steps with a shotgun across her knees, and I thank God every day that she was too stubborn to leave." Natalie laughed, tears streaming down her face, and stood to add her own words. "And I thank God that Benjamin Masters was too kind to run me off and too foolish to be scared away by a desperate widow with nothing to offer but problems. He taught me that it was possible to love again, that I could build a new future without forgetting the past, and that sometimes the best things in life come from taking crazy risks with people you barely know." They kissed as their friends and family cheered, and Benjamin looked around at everything they had built together. The ranch stretched out in all directions, over 1,000 acres now of good grazing land, with 200 head of cattle and horses that were known throughout New Mexico territory for their quality. The buildings were solid and well maintained. There was money in the bank, and their children were healthy and happy and growing into fine people. But more than any of that, Benjamin had Natalie beside him, still beautiful and strong at 40 years old, still his partner in every way that mattered. They had built something lasting together, not just a successful ranch but a real home filled with love and laughter, and the kind of deep contentment that came from facing life's challenges side by side. As the party continued into the night, Benjamin and Natalie slipped away to walk down to the cottonwood tree where Thomas Foster was buried. Natalie knelt by the grave, now covered with wildflowers that had seeded themselves over the years, and spoke softly. "I hope you know how grateful I am," she said, "for the time we had together and for leading me to this place where I would meet Benjamin. You were my first love, and I will carry you in my heart always. But you would want me to be happy, and I am. I truly am." Benjamin stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder, silent and respectful, and when she stood, he took her hand and they walked back toward the house together, toward the light and warmth and noise of their life. The years that followed brought their own challenges and triumphs. Samuel grew into a strong young man who took naturally to ranching and eventually married a girl from town, bringing her to live on the ranch and start his own family. Catherine became a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property that served the children of their workers and neighboring families. The twins grew wild and adventurous, Jacob eventually joining the cavalry, and Grace becoming a skilled horsewoman who helped train the ranch's stock. Benjamin and Natalie grew older together, their hair going gray and their faces lining with age, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming something solid and unshakable that their children used as a model for their own relationships. On a cool evening in October of 1912, Benjamin and Natalie sat on the porch as they had done countless times over the years, watching the sun set over their land. They were both in their 60s now, still active but feeling the weight of decades of hard work in their bones. "We did all right, did we not?" Benjamin said, taking Natalie's hand. "We did more than all right," Natalie replied, squeezing his fingers. "We built something beautiful, Benjamin, not just the ranch but our family, our life together. When I think back to that day you rode up here and found me on these steps, scared and alone and desperate, I can hardly believe how far we have come. I knew from the moment I saw you that you were going to change my life," Benjamin said. "I just did not know how much or how grateful I would be for it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as their grandchildren played in the yard and their children tended to the evening chores. The ranch hummed with life and purpose, everything they had dreamed of and worked for made real through determination and love and the willingness to take a chance on each other. "I love you, Natalie Masters," Benjamin said softly. "I have loved you for 27 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left and beyond, that if such things are possible." "I love you too," Natalie said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You saved me, Benjamin. You gave me a reason to live and a future to believe in. You were my second chance at happiness, and you made it better than I ever thought possible." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch together. Two people who had started as strangers bound only by circumstance and had become partners, lovers, best friends, and the foundation of a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. They had taken a failing ranch and a broken heart and turned them into something lasting and true, and they had done it together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of faith and courage at a time. Years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Benjamin and Natalie eventually stepped back from the day-to-day operations, leaving the running of the ranch to Samuel and Miguel's oldest son, Carlos, who had grown up working the land and knew it as well as anyone. But they remained involved, offering advice and wisdom when asked, and they were beloved figures not just to their family but to everyone in Columbus who knew their story. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1915, the entire community came together for a celebration at the ranch. There were over 100 people gathered, including their 4 children, their spouses, and their 14 grandchildren. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and story after story about Benjamin and Natalie and the life they had built together. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had gone home, their children gathered them on the porch for a special presentation. Samuel stepped forward, holding a framed document, and cleared his throat. "Mother, Father, we wanted to give you something to mark this occasion," he said. 30 years ago, you took a failing ranch and turned it into a successful operation through hard work and love. You raised us to be good people, to work hard, to treat others fairly, and to never give up on what matters. You built not just a ranch but a family and a legacy that will continue for generations. So we have decided, with the help of a lawyer in town, to officially rename this place. From this day forward, it will be known as the Masters Foster Ranch, honoring both of your names and the partnership that made everything possible. Natalie burst into tears, and Benjamin felt his own eyes growing damp as Samuel handed them the framed document making the name change official. Their children embraced them, and their grandchildren clustered around asking why everyone was crying, and Benjamin felt such overwhelming gratitude that he could barely speak. "Thank you," he finally managed. "Thank you for this, and for being the kind of children who make us proud every single day. Everything your mother and I did, we did for you and for the future we wanted to build together. Knowing that you appreciate it and will carry it forward means more than you can possibly know." The celebration continued late into the night, and when Benjamin and Natalie finally went to bed, exhausted but happy, they lay together in the darkness talking softly. "You remember that first night?" Natalie asked. "When you agreed to let me stay and we walked around the property?" "I remember every moment of it," Benjamin said. "I remember thinking that you were the bravest person I had ever met and the most stubborn. I remember thinking that you were either crazy or the kindest man in the world," Natalie said with a laugh. "Turns out you were both." "We were quite a pair," Benjamin agreed. "A lonely cowboy and a heartbroken widow, both of us too stubborn to give up on a failing ranch." "We still are quite a pair," Natalie said. "Just older and hopefully wiser." "Definitely older," Benjamin said. "The wiser part is debatable." They laughed together in the darkness, and then Natalie grew serious. "I want you to know something, Benjamin. If I could go back and change anything, if I could have avoided all the pain and loss, I would not do it. Because all of it, the good and the bad, led me to you. And these 30 years with you have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," Benjamin said, pulling her close. "Mine too." They lived on together for many more years, watching their grandchildren grow and their great-grandchildren arrive. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, expanded and modernized but still true to the principles Benjamin and Natalie had established. They became the matriarch and patriarch of a large, sprawling family, their love story told and retold until it became almost legendary in Columbus. Benjamin passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1925, at the age of 66, with Natalie holding his hand and their children gathered around his bed. His last words were to tell Natalie that he loved her and that their life together had been everything he had ever wanted. Natalie lived for 5 more years, remaining active and involved with the ranch and her family until the very end. She passed away in the spring of 1930, at the age of 68, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch overlooking the land she and Benjamin had built together. Her last act was to smile at the grandchild who was reading to her and say, "Tell your grandfather I will see him soon." They were buried side by side under the cottonwood tree, next to Thomas Foster, the 3 of them together in the earth that had been the foundation of so much love and loss and eventual triumph. A simple stone marked their graves with an inscription that read, "Benjamin and Natalie Masters. Partners in life, love, and legacy. They built something lasting." The Masters Foster Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, but never forgetting the foundation that Benjamin and Natalie had laid. The house they had repaired and expanded remained standing, full of the laughter of children and the memories of a love that had transformed 2 broken people into something whole. And on summer evenings, when the sun set over the New Mexico desert and the cattle settled in for the night, it was said that you could sometimes see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the old house, holding hands and watching over the land they had saved together, their love as enduring as the earth beneath their feet and as constant as the stars wheeling overhead in the vast western sky.